What does a nation do to become federally recognized? How is
It's
that done?
it's a long, dragged out process that can cost millions of dollars, literally.
It's interesting with all the diverse foods we have, especially in New York. I've never yet seen a so-called named Native American restaurant.
Welcome, everyone, to Odds and Ends, Life, Entertainment, Theater, and the Arts. I am Andrew Joseph Kozlowski, and with me tonight, my good friend, world-class musician, music producer, and co-host, Mr. Cool himself, Clyde Bullard. Tonight, our special guest, Mr. Lonnie Harrington. Guitarist, percussionist, singer, songwriter, Lonnie Harrington has been strumming, hitting, and singing his way throughout the eastern United States and eastern Canada for more than 45 years, spanning many musical styles. As a leader and sideman, he's performed in diverse nightclub and concert venues. During his time in college, he began independent research into Afro-Native American relations, an endeavor he continues to this very day. Lonnie Harrington is of African, Seminole, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Shawnee ancestry, and is the author of the book Both Sides of the Water, Essays on African Native American Interaction. He is a historian of the Powwow Committee and has chaired and co-chaired several of their powwows. He was a member of the Drum Circle Singers, a Native American drum group that performed throughout several states in the northeastern United States. He is also a men's traditional dancer and has danced at powwows and events in different parts of the United States. His album, Northern Tropical and Other Romantic Illusions, was released in September of 2017. The music represents the many influences of genres he's comfortable performing in, and his instrumental single, I Wonder, was released in September of 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very happy to have with us tonight Mr. Lonnie Harrington.
Native American nations, would you say, can be attributed to exist? How many? 100, 200, 300, 500?
In excess of, I would say, at least 800, where we do have to observe certain protocols. For example, if an eagle feather hits the ground, that symbolizes a fallen warrior. So regardless of if it's a small social powwow or a large competition powwow, everything comes to a halt until we do certain sort of protocols to pay respect to that feather, which represents the fallen warrior, before things can continue.
I have actually kind of curated 5 powwows. And in that journey, I have learned that Native Americans can look so diverse. Some people look Caucasian, some people look Hispanic, some African American, and yet they all call themselves Native Americans. what about you had mentioned to me uh, how Foxwoods at one time was making a lot of revenue and paying a lot of taxes to
Well, yeah,
Connecticut?
their business within the state of Connecticut. Some people think, indigenous people, nations don't pay taxes. And it's not true. And in fact, at their peak, if I remember correctly, $25 million a year in taxes were being paid from the Mashantucket people to the state of Connecticut in taxes. That's no chump change.
Sure. And
And
that created a lot of employment for people, Native American and non-Native American.
indeed, very well, very much so.
Right. And I guess you would say the Foxwoods is still probably in existence. It's just that the pandemic has slowed it down a little bit.
Well, although I have some Mashantucket friends, I haven't been in touch with them in a while. I know business-wise, they're not as big as they used to be, but the casino is still there. Um, Goodness, I haven't been to the powwow, the Skimitzen, which is roughly based on their green corn Skimitzen, but it was one of the largest powwows in the country at one point. I first went in 2000 as an observer. No, excuse me, 1998. I first went as an observer. Wow, they were down to 41 drums. When they first started, they had like 63 drums. But to be in this tent the size of a city block, I'm getting all goosebumps again because as a dancer and a singer, I've done many powwows over the years. But to see a grand entry last more than an hour and a half,
How many people?
dancers were coming in by the thousands, and I'm getting teared up again. It was a vision coming in by the thousands. I, wow, it was a vision, it was a dream. And yeah, I'm ego tripping. That particular year I was there, even though I couldn't dance because I had a bad foot. The Seminole tribe of Florida honor guard led it off. So yeah, I was really tripping, man.
Wow.
But to see dancers coming in by the thousands. Now I did dance there in 2000, not as a competitor because I'm not a competitive dancer, but I danced there at their 2000 on a Saturday, and to be part of that was just incredible. Again, just have dancers coming in by the thousands, all
Wow.
different traditions. I will say something funny though. I was in a category all by myself, the only one. I was the only men's traditional Southeastern dancer. Number
Wow.
one. Hundreds and hundreds of other folks in front of me. The one, men's Southeastern traditional. Yours truly, one guy.
Beautiful. Now, let us talk about Native American culinary habits. What did Native Americans eat? How did they survive all of these hundreds or thousands of years? What was their diet?
Now it's
It
going to
had to be
vary.
more than buffalo meat.
Well, it's going to vary depending on where you are. Now, again, in the more temperate and warmer climates, the diet definitely was more plant-based. The more further north you go, where plants were harder to come by, it was more meat-based. Meat and fish played a role regardless of where you were. But depending on where you were more plant-based. But it's going to vary depending on where you are. Now, case in point, I talked about, I think before this, I actually had some cousins, my mother's generation, cousins that were alligator wrestlers. Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Now, how that came about, though, as it was told to me, oral tradition, those of us that weren't killed, meaning Seminole people, that weren't killed, enslaved, or forced to go to Indian Territory, which you now call modern day Oklahoma, when we were hiding out in different rural areas, such as the Peheoki, the Everglades, alligators are one of the things we've used for food, but we couldn't risk using a rifle to draw in, say, if there were any army patrols in the region, they'd hear that. So those elders came up with a way of wrangling and trapping and wrestling alligators, not crocodiles. We'll get into that right now. It's a whole difference. But alligators in particular, so they can get a food source, but do it in a more quiet kind of manner.
Sometime after, I guess, the last Indian Wars, and not just Seminole Wars, it seemed like it became romantic to go see Indians doing their thing. Like powwows and stuff where people wanted to go watch Native Americans dance. In Florida, it was like new, you know what I mean, in the early 1900s. So it just became a tourist thing, and I think it became a cool thing to see these Native Americans do what they do. I mean, I'd be amazed if I saw a 10-year-old kid wrestling an 8-foot gator.
It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, you're talking
I was
about
going to say, isn't it is there's an element of danger in wrestling with an alligator, right?
very much so. I mean, people get hurt doing that. I'll say this though, years ago, a Lakota friend of mine from the Northern Plains said, "Man, you Seminoles are crazy with them alligators." I said, "Well, yeah, man, you Lakota are crazy with them buffalo, man."
Now, here's another interesting point I've been thinking of. We have Italian restaurants, Japanese restaurants, Jamaican restaurants, Japanese restaurants.
I got to stop you right there, Clyde.
Wait a minute.
I
Wait a
gotta-
minute. Let me finish.
No, I got to tie this in, bro. I got to tie this in. The Japanese have a great alligator recipe, man. They make some. I've had Japanese style grilled ginger alligator, man. Some of the best stuff I ever had, man. But
I don't
you're
want it.
saving.
I will never taste it. But my
I'll have your
point
portion.
was, my point was, it's interesting with all the diverse foods we have, especially in New York. I've never yet seen a so-called named Native American restaurant. Why is that?
Well, interestingly enough, now it depends on how you want to use the term Native American. Because if you look at Mexican food, most of that is indigenous, bro.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, depending on how you want to use that term, but I know what you're talking about. There was Silverbird for a while up on the Upper West Side. I don't know why it closed down. I never ate there because when I saw some of the price, I said, I'll wait till powwow seasons or get invited to a friend's house.
It seems like somebody might have had an idea to profit and capitalize on it. Could be really a great idea having Native American decorum and the food. But what I'm saying is maybe there's not one specific Native American cuisine or
There isn't.
diet that can be codified to make that happen.
True, and as I understand it, when Silverbird was around, it had a variety of different sort of recipes there. Let me just say this on a related note, but on an aside, Hard Rock is owned by the Seminole tribe of Florida. Shayna!
Hard Rock, what? Hard Rock Cafe?
Hard Rock and all the whole Hard Rock franchise is owned by the Seminole tribe of Florida.
I
Purchased in
never knew that.
2005.
I remember there used to be a time, probably no more, when paratroopers would jump out of planes, they would scream Geronimo, Geronimo.
Yeah.
You know, now Geronimo, he was, what tribe or nation was he from?
I don't remember specifically Apache. I'm not sure if it was Chiricahua or Mescalero. Um, Goyoyfle was the name he was known among his people. I'm not sure how he got the name Geronimo, but his real name was Goyotle.
Now, Sitting Bull also has a big part in the Native American history.
Among our northern people, yes.
Yes. Why do you think that's so?
Well, he was a holy man, and he was to be respected for what he did for his community over his lifetime. And it was sad that he ended up being killed by another indigenous person, but the times we live in.
Right.
And unfortunately, we can talk about divide and conquer, have one whole program at that. But yeah, we've been played off against each other.
Sure.
Let's face it, it's happened.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the elder Sitting Bull met his end at the hands of another indigenous person.
Now, Native Americans also, from what I understand, kind of spearheaded the use of plants and herbs, teaching us how to use certain plants that had medicinal properties to heal.
Well, let me stop you right there, brother, because show me one part of the earth where that wasn't true. Now, I said I wouldn't get too political, but I'll try to behave myself, but I've got to go there a little bit. Before 1492, what did the ruling classes in Europe, what had they done? They had actually crushed those particular cultures where those things were prevalent. They went after, I wouldn't say they were necessarily matrilineal societies, but they went after the women that were the healers in those different particular settlements all throughout Europe, using herbs. The use of herbs is not, unique just to what we call in North America now, or Turtle Island, or the land of the crocodile, or the land of the condor, depending on where you are in this hemisphere.
Right.
It's been, look at Africa.
Sure.
Look at our relatives in Australia, throughout Asia. So again, we're talking about traditions. Now, who influenced who? And we can talk about, what happened prior to 1492, and I know that's kind of controversial. But again, who influenced who? But no, there's certain, what's the term, parallel development. We see these parallels throughout the world going back for millennia.
Interesting. Now, another thing which is sad, but I must briefly touch upon it. I went to see a movie called Wind River, which touched upon a very serious subject because the movie, when it finally opens up, it begins with a woman, Native American, running out of a trailer in ice cold weather, barefooted, like she's trying to escape something.
I need emergency assistance.
What's your location?
The Wind River Indian Reservation.
This is a homicide.
I knew that girl. She's a fighter.
What is it that you do again?
Hunt predators.
So why don't you come hunt one for me then? Why would a teenage girl be out here? What is she running from?
You're looking for clues.
Shouldn't we wait for backup?
This isn't a land of backup, Jane. This is a land of you're on your own.
Oh my God.
You won't get the answers you're looking for, no matter what you find.
Why would your daughter run from home?
I don't know why. He didn't tell me. Out here. You cannot blink. Not ever.
This place. What it takes from us.
We later learned that she was being molested by a group of men or raped. From what I understand, this is a prevalent problem with Native American women, that hundreds, if not thousands of them, are still being raped and murdered with no restitution. No one's really seeking to find out who are the perpetrators. Is that something that is still happening today?
Bottom line, yes. It hits close to home. It happened to the niece of a friend of mine. She went missing and her body wasn't found for months. But tragically, though, it's we can restrict this just to our indigenous relatives, but too often this happens to sisters across the board.
Okay.
But no, missing and murdered indigenous women, it's a major issue. And I'll just say this coming as being an older man, but hey, honor and respect all of us, because we don't know what, life will throw at us.
Right.
My heart goes out to my relatives that lost their niece, their daughter. So again, let's respect each other and protect each other. Yeah, I'm going there. Some of our sisters are quite capable of defending themselves, but I'll just say this as a man, hey, honor and respect our sisters. And if it comes down to it, we will protect them. Period. Quote me on that. I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to take me up on that.
Right.
I'm just telling it like it is. This
Sure.
is a major issue.
Okay.
But hey, respect our sisters, period.
Yes. Now, where do you feel, or what would you say is in the future for Native American culture in America, particularly
You mean the United States?
United States?
There's still a long way to go in many different areas.
Why? Or why would you say?
Well, unfortunately, racism is still quite prevalent. And maybe we can look at it in policies that have happened over the years contemporarily.
Yes.
I know that coming with the new administration on the federal level, the president is taking actions to reverse things that happened under the prior administration. I think that's a good start. Now, I've been called a spoiler before, but unfortunately, with the prior administration, the bar was set so low, people wanted to get back to normal. Well, you know what? Normal wasn't that good to begin with.
Okay.
So yeah, we're coming back to a point. No, we've got to do a lot better than that.
Right.
Across the board. Now, I see some steps being taken right now with this particular administration. The story is still continuing and ongoing, but no, a lot more still needs to be done throughout many communities. Not just indigenous, throughout many communities.
Okay.
Then again, our relatives among the plains have a saying, "Mitakwi yoyasan." We're all related. And it's interesting. The older I get, I'm finding out more and more. Yeah, we are all related. I know personally in my family, I'm literally related to everybody in the world. So if something happens in any corner of this planet, chances are I've got bloodlines among them. So I'm messed up.
Okay. Now, tell me a little bit about your book. You have written a book. What's the name of your book?
The book is called Both Sides of the Water, Essays on African Native American Interactions. And I wrote that in response to things I felt needed to be addressed, being someone of the heritage. And at that point, when I started it in 1992, at that point, many things in writing weren't covered, and those that were covered, for the most part, I found offensive, with a few exceptions. So the book is coming from my perspective, being of both heritage. In other words, I can trace my ancestry back to Africa as well as here, and as well as being a researcher, having done this sort of research since 1972. It's written from my perspective, and I say that quite bluntly. Although I stand by most of my research in there, although I've been called out on one or two things So you have to admit, give credit where it's due. But no, I stand by my research for the most part. It is coming from my particular perspective, being somebody of indigenous and African heritage.
Cool. What does the book proclaim to show or teach us?
The different sort of interactions that happen between people of African descent and the indigenous people throughout the hemisphere, although I concentrate primarily on North America. I do look into Central and South, what we now call Central and South America, and the Caribbean to a certain degree too. I also touch a little bit on some interactions that may have happened in Africa, way back when.
Okay. Has the book been receiving a lot of good, I would say, press? A lot of good. It's been received well by people.
Well, folks that have read it have feedback I've gotten. They've respected things I've had to say. The book came out in March of 2007, and right now, due to a legal issue, it's being revised. So I'll just say this, being totally shameless and self-serving. If anyone is interested in obtaining a copy of the book, they would have to contact me directly because it won't be available from the publisher for another few months. And what that is a quote from James Baldwin. I only could legally use for 14 years, and I had to, and that period expired as of late February 2020.
Okay.
So the next edition won't have that quote from James Baldwin, which appears on page 5. Could I read that to you?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to read this quote, which appears in the original volume 1, or edition number 1 of the book on page 5. And it says, both continents, Africa and America, be it remembered, were discovered. What a wealth of arrogance that little word contains, with devastating results for the indigenous populations whose only human use thereafter was a source of capital for white people. On both continents, the white and dark gods met in combat, and it is on the outcome of this combat that the future of both continents depends. This is from No Name in the Street, published in 1972 by James Baldwin. So the original copy of the book has that quote. The second edition of the book will not have that quote in it.
Yes, I would say the Native American relationship to United States is very complex. In some ways, some people might call it brutal.
Well, it's interesting because I know you and I have had conversations about a project you want to do through Flushing Town Hall, and some of our Matinacock relatives came up.
Yes.
The Matinacock are not recognized on the federal level by the United States government.
They're not?
No, they're not. They're not a federally recognized tribe. But there are Matinacock people. The implication is that they don't exist as people. That's nonsense. They are people. Yeah, the community has been devastated over the years, but they're still a very distinct people. As one example, and they're not.
So what does a nation do to become federally recognized? How is that done?
It's a long, dragged out process that can cost millions of dollars, literally, and it can take decades. And unfortunately, even though you get this recognition, it's rather fragile. I mean, some nations have been quote unquote terminated, which means that the government will then terminate their relationship with you and you're no longer recognized as a distinct community. So it's nasty. But
that doesn't invalidate you as being an American, does it?
Well, no, because most indigenous people, whether they like it or not, have dual citizenship. Now, I know some of my more traditional friends, and I respect them, say, no, I don't consider myself a citizen of the United States. And I respect that. The government doesn't see it that way.
Okay.
But no, I know where my relatives are coming from, and I respect that.
Okay.
But, forcibly, many indigenous people in North America were forced into becoming United States citizens in 1924. I don't remember the name of the specific act, but a specific federal legislation was passed in 1924, making all indigenous folks in North America citizens of the United States of America.
Interesting. I would say also, how many nations would you say still are here now in the United States?
Well, I go back to the number I said before. I would say 700 plus easily. It's probably more than that.
And these nations have like their own charters, their own schools. Are there any evidence that we can see that they exist here?
No, well, it's going to vary depending on where you are. Some don't have the resources to have their own quote unquote charters and schools. I mean, I know some smaller communities that do have charters, but many don't have their land base anymore.
I see.
We try to come together as a community as best they can, but some don't have a land base any longer. We spoke earlier about language retention. Many of them are trying their best to retain languages and other sorts of aspects of cultural retention. Now, some other nations do, depending on how well they've done economically. Some will have their own school systems. Some will have their own language programs, but it's going to vary depending on where you are and what the economic resources exist so that folks can afford to be able to make these sort of things happen, these sort of projects take place.
I guess one great point of fact to give testimony to a Native American presence in the United States is that so many rivers, roads, uh, forests, and parks, unbeknownst to many people, because they've never thought about it, actually are named after Native Americans. And you can, if you know the folklore and history, you can see the names like Manhasset. He talks about Tallahassee, and there's so
Mass-
many other.
Massapequa, Sagittos, Montauk, oh goodness, Alaska,
Really? Alaska?
yeah, Kansas, okay, Oklahoma, which means red people in Choctaw, Mississippi, okay, Connecticut, which means Long River in that particular language. I don't remember which one specifically, but one of the Pequot languages. Massachusetts. Yep.
What does that mean?
I don't know, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't know, but it
Okay.
is an indigenous name.
Okay.
And the list goes on and on and on. And just other sort of aspects. Broadway was based on an old trading trail, okay, here in New York State. It said, historically speaking, a Lenape runner could run from the tip of Manhattan, or Manhattan, depending which dialect, to roughly what is now Albany and back in a little over 24 hours at one point. Now, I'm a runner. I don't run quite like that anymore, but that's moving, man, and that's some endurance.
I know that there's a lot of history, especially in American warfare magazines, where they exalt Native Americans as being some of the greatest guerrilla fighters.
I'm going to go there for a moment, man. To me, now, originally I wasn't going to see this movie until Wes Studi, a Cherokee actor who I deeply respect, said he thought it was some of his best work. So I actually got myself and saw the movie, the remake of Last of the Mohicans. Now, to me, the first, up until the last 15 minutes of the movie, to me, it was an action comedy.
Okay.
But going to what you were implying before, tactics of guerrilla warfare, when you see the British doing warfare in a certain way, that's why a lot of those guys got wiped out. Those ancestors, yeah, were fighting in a much more practical manner. And again, let me just say this: I'm not glorifying warfare. Don't get me wrong.
No, neither am I.
Okay, so I just want to be quite clear about that. But it was interesting to see the tactics, and yeah, Europeans in particular, when they got here, started to adopt some of the tactics of different indigenous people as far as combat is concerned.
So you'd say modern warfare has probably even adopted some stealth techniques that Native Americans incepted.
I would say yeah, but again, I wouldn't restrict it to just here because the nature of combat, and you and I both have experience in the martial arts. You look around and you take ideas from everywhere.
Yes.
And even though I didn't serve, I do come from a long line of professional military men going back to the late 19th century. So yeah, you look for your tactics and ideas from a number of different places.
So you would also say spirituality is spirituality, whether it comes from a Native American perspective or African perspective or a Taoist perspective or Buddhist perspective or Christian. We're all tapping into the same universal source, so to speak.
Well, respectfully, man, I'm going to say you're stating the obvious as far as I'm concerned. What is the term? There's many paths to the top of the mountain. And again, I usually don't talk about religion in a lady's age, so let me just. But no, there are many different ways. And again, I don't generally talk about this because historically speaking and traditionally speaking, it's a very personal way, the way you see yourself between you and the creator, no matter how you observe and think he or her is or what particular pantheon they belong to. So I try to respect other people's beliefs. I emphasize I try, but I generally don't
Oh,
discuss that because, again, it's a very personal sort of matter.
right. I understand. Well, I think this has been a great foray into Native American culture, and we'll come back and maybe have you come back and we'll do a part two. There's so many other things I know that we didn't talk about.
Well, I could say if you want to catch up on some sleep, you know where to find me, but I'll be glad to come back and thank you for having me today. Or
Okay.
Shanabisha.
Peace, brother.
Ni. Peace.
Lonnie, we sure do hope that you enjoyed visiting with us tonight. and hope you'll come and see us again real soon. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lonnie Harrington. Folks, please stay advised of all the events by following the Josephine Foundation on our Facebook page, our Instagram account, and our brand new YouTube channel. A big time thanks to our special guest, Mr. Lonnie Harrington. Also, folks, on behalf of my co-host, Mr. Clyde Ballard, our producer, Mr. Gio Vitozzi, and myself, we wish you peace, strength, and love until we see you next week on Odds and Ends Life Entertainment, Theater, and the Arts. Good night, everybody.